Budgeted $50,000, spent $36,612. And as you'll see at the bottom, we were in the red about $68,476. However, we bought property on South Shore Drive for $102,000. So Adam will do a lot more explaining on some of the costs for the 2019 budget summary, but that really, in a nutshell, is kind of where we were in 2019. So if there's not any questions for 2019, we'll move on to the resolution 220-01. As we've been discussing, the cumulative improvement fund, we need to have this approved by April 30th of this year. And let me just get to the resolution. I'm sorry, I thought it was there. Here it is. Yeah, is it, that's my year-end report. I went the wrong way. Okay, resolution 220-01, cumulative improvement fund. If approved, this begins the process of implementing a tax-funded cumulative improvements. The tax is capped at 0.033, which is 3.3 cents on each $100 of assessed value. So I would seek a motion to approve Resolution 220-01 for the Cumulative Improvement Fund, which would pay in 2021. And of course, it's...
So do we motion to approve that resolution?
Yes.
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 I'll make that motion.
Okay,
I'll
thank you,
second
Mary
it.
Jane. Motion is made and seconded. Is there any more discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And that is it for me, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, go ahead and get into the 2019 annual report. This really kind of goes over to some of the significant operations throughout the year. It really was a banner year, record year as far as revenue at the park, boat passes, dredging. Overall, it was just a very good year. For the board of directors, we had one re-election last year. Actually, Mike Blackwell ran again for another 4 years, ran unopposed, so there was not an election. For personnel, we utilized 4 different gatehouse attendants, and we had a guy that ran push boat and the lake patrol for a little bit. Went through a handful of push boat operators. Seemed to always lose them to union just because they get benefits. But actually, towards the end of last year, we brought on Roger Edwards, who owns a dock and lift company on the lake. Was getting out of that business. I've been working on him for the past couple of years to try to get him running push boats. He's familiar with the lake and equipment. And I actually brought him back on, and he seems to be willing and excited to stick around for this year. We also brought on this year, well, Clint Allender, who was running our dredge operation last year, we brought him on full-time this year. So actually created a salary position with benefits, retirement, and that way we can entice people to stick on. I'm really happy to have him here. He's doing a great job. And I'll be happy to keep some staff around and incentivize them to stay here. As far as gatehouse operations, which is essentially the park, the season started on March 22nd, selling passes. And we sold passes through November 25th. We usually stop selling right around Thanksgiving, and we take out the boat dock. Boat permit fees collected in 2019 totaled $135,296. This is about a $6,000 increase in revenue compared to 2018. And we did host 16 fishing tournaments during 2019. For aquatic plant management, we really underspent the budget. Sometimes we'll have 2 submerged treatments, then we'll do the emergent. This year we only actually had 1 submerged, and then we did our 2 emergent treatments, which are Lotus, Spatter Dock, the above waterline plants. And the biggest savings of that is actually a result of the increase in rain that we've been having over the winter time. The later we have the rain, the lake stays muddy, clouds out the sunlight from getting to the substrate, and it delays the growth of vegetation. So we actually treated for the first time on June 14th. We did treat a total of 51 acres of submersed vegetation, primarily Eurasian milfoil, which is a nuisance species, and we treated 27.6 acres of lotus and spatterdock in channels and on the east end at the maintenance line. We treated 16 nests for wildlife control, the geese. I'll be interested to see this next year with how warm the temperatures are. You can already hear them out there on the islands, and there's no boats in the water, so we'll have to see how early their breeding season is this year. IU School of Public and Environmental Affairs continued the water testing for 2019. This is mandated, and we've actually upped their contract to look at blue-green algae and a few other different parameters than we have in the past. We will be probably next month having the annual report from them for 2019. As always, it seems like Lake Lemon pretty much stays the same. For a trophic lake, meaning there's a high nutrient load. A lot of that is what we call internal loading. It's in the sediment. And the reason it pretty much stays the same is we turn over our entire volume of water about 5 times per year. So the lake stays pretty flushed out. Fecal coliform concentrations are tested at the beach, E. coli, on a weekly basis. This was the first time in a little bit that we actually did have a period where we had to shut the beach down from August 22nd through August 29th when we were above the state risk thresholds. They do not mandate closing at that point, but once you're at that level, it's better to be safe than sorry. I think a lot of that was we tested directly after a major water event. Been pretty dry out, droughty. Then we get a big rain that kind of comes in and washes out the watershed, and we tested right at the tail end of that storm. So it's likely that those levels have been that high before, but generally by the time we test, they've been able to get flushed out and kind of run out of the lake. So I did not think it was a cause for alarm or more than we normally see. I just think it was the timing of testing in relation to a storm event. At Riddle Point Park, we opened on Friday, May 24th. The admissions are charged daily through Monday, September 2nd, essentially Memorial Day to Labor Day. Vehicle passes were $60 for the season, and daily parks were $7,000 per vehicle. The total park admissions collected were $51,200. That was an increase of $4,800 compared to 2018. The shelter was rented 18 times and brought in an additional $2,000. And then IU Women's Rowing brought in $400 for the rowing event, since they a little less money than we get historically because they no longer use Riddle Point Park. As far as shoreline projects, which would be seawalls, although we really try to discourage those, riprap, any type of modification. There's 3 permits that were issued freeholders in 2019. Since 1996, we've had 383 permits, and those do encompass docking projects, seawalls, riprap, really any type of modification to the shoreline. The Lake Lemon Enhancement Program, which is the dredging operation, we use both barges for the majority of the season. A lot of the channels that we're in, we were required to use a small barge, and we'd actually use them in unison to where we could dig with the small barge, unload to the large one, and then transport, which actually works out pretty good and is pretty efficient there. It was a record year. We removed a little over 15,300 cubic yards of sediment in a season. Prior to that, the highest was a little over 13,000, so about 1,500 to 2,000 increase in a season, which was awesome. And really, that kind of attests to, I think, bringing on Clinton, knowing that he's going to have a full-time job coming up, having the staff there. And we did start. We were on the water mid-March this past year, so we were on the water for a little bit longer, but banner year for the dredging operation. As far as cost, the staff cost for the entire dredging operation came out to $59,000. A little over $36,000 was for LLCD funded dredging. LLCD other, which encompasses disposal site prep, equipment maintenance, work in the park, totaled $20,000 in wages. And then LLCD private actually only totaled $2,600 in wages. We did a lot more of the LLCD dredging, but with that $2,600, we made over $20,000 in revenue from private work. doing private dredging versus the riprap, which actually ends up being a little bit more money. With the riprap, we charge cost of stone direct and $100 per hour, and we actually raised the barge fees for private dredging. For our non-operating costs, well, equipment operating costs, the non-staff cost, it was a pretty expensive year, $74,000. Large chunk of this was we essentially had to rebuild the motor on the push boat, and there was some big work on the excavator. So those were the brunt of those costs, and I believe it was, I don't have it right in front of me, but it was close to $30,000 more than we generally spend. A lot of that's the longer the season we have, you're gonna have more issues. But we essentially have a brand new push boat now, so we should be hopefully keeping the cost down moving forward. For the private dredging summary, again, we did no private riprap jobs this year. It was all private dredging. We did 5 jobs. In District 4, we did 4 private jobs for a total of 366 cubic yards. And we brought in $9,500 revenue. And in District 5, we did 1 job for 800 cubic yards and brought in $12,000 revenue. So we brought in $21,500 in monies from private dredging. And as we move forward, I think we'll be able to increase, and we're going to plan to budget for more private work within the year to help bring in some monies and kind of fund the other operations that are going on. That's the report. Overall, it's a pretty smooth year. The finances were great, brought money in. I think the beach, Lake Monroe was flooded out, but about 2 years ago was the first time Monroe really didn't open up for a month to 2 late. And I think a lot of the utilizers at Monroe came to Lake Lemon, and we actually retained quite a bit of that. So it's very, very good to see. I don't know if there's any other questions about the operation for.
I was surprised that we had 16 fishing tournaments and we only took in $900. I guess I was thinking we didn't think we were gonna have hardly any fishing tournaments out there anymore, but.
That's kind of a reduction from the
Kinda.
past, but they only bring in, I mean, it's not, they bring in essentially $50 for the tournament.
Yeah.
But all of them either buy dailies on top of that, and the majority of the clubs actually buy season passes. So I think that is actually one of the reasons that we keep the cost so low is they're already buying season passes. So we get quite a bit of boats that come down for that. So there's some additional revenue rather than just the tournaments as well. We did actually have some issues with the tournaments and fishermen fishing right on top of people on docks, not looking for space. So we've had a talk with the fishing captains, and we've actually created a codes of conduct form that we are going to be having at the gatehouse that people sign off when they buy a resident pass or when they buy annual passes. And then we also are having the fishing tournament leaders sign these off and kind of spread these rules to their fishermen so we can try to cut back on that. I think that was one of the biggest complaints is, and out on the lake patrol boat, I'd see fishermen out there, people are out swimming or on docks and they were just right on top of them. So we were getting pretty aggressive telling them to move on, but hopefully the codes of conduct will reduce that.
Hopefully.
All right, after that we have our vegetation control contract.
Well,
Oh.
This wasn't, you kind of skipped over the fireworks.
Yeah.
And I can read, but what I'm curious about is when the 2020 fireworks are going to be.
We'll sign the contract. The fireworks were $8,000. Sorry, I didn't see that. We spent $8,000 on the fireworks. It's a local company, and they essentially do it at cost. We're really just paying for shells and their insurance. So the cost is $8,000, and we recruit all of that plus some in donations. I've been talking with people. I know July 4th is right on a Saturday. I believe Ellettsville will get that Saturday, so I've told them Friday with a rain date of Sunday. We've never had to use a rain date, but I think Friday should work out pretty good. And Friday is the holiday as well for federal and government.
Right.
So we'll have that day off. So we'll go ahead and plan for Friday the 3rd for the fireworks. And we'll have that contract probably at the next meeting. But I have been talking with them.
So at a later date, we'll talk about how big we want it. It was spectacular, but it'd be nice to have a bit of a margin.
As far
More
as.
of a margin, make money on it.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Capitalize on making money. They're always good.
Yeah,
Wonderful every year.
I thought they're exceptionally good this year. But I feel like as long as we make the money back. It would be nice to
Well,
make money though.
but I would agree,
Yeah, well-
if we made more money, then could we not earmark some of that to go into the Lake Lemon enhancement funds?
Yeah.
Yeah, we could, and we could actually, and I would say the biggest part is we could charge
If-
more
if
at
we-
the gate for a special event. We
Well-
can't put money into the enhancement funds. though.
Correct.
I understand
Yeah.
that, but what if we marketed the fireworks as a chance to also give money to the Lake Lemon enhancement fund?
Do as like a donation or a fee to
Yeah.
go to that. Yeah, we
No,
could
I know,
absolutely-
the Conservancy District can't write the
Yeah.
check.
But they specifically could.
Yeah,
But
generally
if
we
they-
do for the non-residents, when they come to the park, we keep that as donations we actually charge this year, but we could easily make that, donations or the charges at the park gate could go to the enhancement fund. Absolutely.
I'm just saying, I think we're gonna get the same people out there. If it's a bigger bang or a little bit less bang, if we can make more money on it,
Well,
Anyway, we don't have to get.
we don't have to
on that.
discuss that tonight, but
No.
I like the idea too of charging more
Mhm.
for that entrance to the park on that day.
Mhm.
I mean, it is a holiday.
And it's a special event, so we can absolutely do that.
How long is the contract that they have with Ellettsville that always gets them on the?
They usually, I think they generally give the fourth to their highest paying customer, and I believe Ellettsville's around 15,000.
It's likely not us.
So we need
Well, a
to
girl can
double
wish,
to-
right?
So, I mean, if we get some donations in advance.
Yeah, that might go contrary to what Mary Jane.
Yeah. So their highest payer usually gets on the fourth. So next we have the operating agreement with Aquatic Vegetation Control. Aquatic Control, we've been using them for a long time. I very much enjoy working with them. They do a good job, and the contracts are $50,000 not to exceed. A while ago, we used to pass that. It seems like we have so much rain in the springtime now. We've been coming in substantially underneath, but the contract's not to exceed $50,000. There's no discussion, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve the vegetation control contract with Aquatic Control.
I'll make that motion, Adam.
Do you think that would change at all if that maintenance line ends up moving? Is this like based upon certain area? I mean, that's the only thing I would
Yeah.
say, that there might have to be an addendum.
So I don't foresee the cost changing that much. The first year or two, when we're knocking back the maintenance line, there'll be additional acreage sprayed there. The cost for Lotus is pretty low though. And then after about 2 years, the root systems will actually die off, and then it's more of a just maintenance for, small patches that pop up.
Right, but that's
So we
something
may
we
see
just
a
don't know yet.
Correct.
Because we don't know if we have the approval yet.
Correct.
Okay.
There may be a slight increase just for pushing that back, but it's probably less than 5 or 6 acres there, so I don't really
That's fine.
expect it to
It shouldn't make a
impact,
big difference.
And this was the same amount we contracted for last year?
Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
same amount we've budgeted probably for
Several
over a
years.
decade.
Yeah, as long as
You
I've
think, you
been,
think 10?
I think
As long
you
as
had a
I've been
motion,
on the
I'll
board.
second.
Yes, I made the motion to approve the contract. Michael has seconded it. Is there any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of approving the contract with Aquatic Control for 2020, please say aye.
aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
You can pass that down to Pam to sign, please. Next up, we have our operating agreement for the mowing operation. This includes Riddle Point Park, the dam, and the spillway areas. We advertised this in the newspaper, and we actually only received 2 bids back. They were both within $400 of each other, and one of them, the cheaper one was, I think, $10,200, but the entire operation was a guy with 1 mower and his 2 sons, which I'm not necessarily in favor of. The second offer is Anderson Excavating, who's actually had our contract since 2016, and he only raised his pricing by about $400. So the total pricing comes out to $10,860. I believe it was $10,400 before. And we've been very happy with them. Even if we have to have them come out for extra work, they're right on top of it. They're local. So I would like to go ahead and recommend a motion to approve the LLCD mowing operating agreement with Nate Anderson Excavating for the cost of $10,860.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded that we approve this contract. Hello, I'm blanking on the name. Anderson, thank you. Mowing services. Is there any further discussion? All right, if there being none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Contract
All
approved.
right. Next up, we have the sediment management project. We've started about 2 years ago.
Whoa.
This is dredging.
Dredging priorities.
G.
Yeah, sorry, I said sediment, the dredging priorities. We started about 2 years ago
It's all sediment.
doing, it's all sediment, there's a lot of sediment. Doing the dredging priorities in February because we've been hitting the water pretty early. We're in the water in March last year. It'll probably be a little bit later this year because along with record sediment removal comes record disposal site cleanup. And the fact that our articulating truck is currently not in operation. We do actually have a couple agreements with people to actually take dirt, so I'm pretty hopeful that we'll be able to get rid of quite a bit of this dirt here in the next couple weeks. We have a couple people that are bringing in triaxles, and we're going to move out as much dirt as possible from this site over the next couple of weeks. So along with that, my recommendations for priorities would be to finish Chitwood. We're probably about 100 feet from being done with all the channels. We've made it to the furthest back cove there, is to finish out that area. And then my next recommendation would be to move into the Dorothy Lane area. And this both accomplishes digging out a channel that currently has no access to the homes, to the creek, and ultimately the lake. And this also goes along with opening up the creek channel for the flow pathways to help get the sediment-laden water to spread out into the wetland versus just going down Bean Blossom Creek straight into the lake. So that would be my recommendation. I think I can never say how long they actually take, and we'll have to utilize both barges for that. I don't know if there's discussions or what people think would be
How many
potential third.
How many houses would be serviced by this?
I believe 5 or 6 on Dorothy Lane.
Okay, now remind me now, what's the kind of the criteria for private, something that benefits just
So
individuals
generally-
versus the whole lake? you know?
Generally, once you get to the point where you're servicing only one home, we'll consider it private. So if it's an access channel where you have multiple homes, we'll consider that kind of like a roadway and that LLCD dredging. If we get to the point where, we've done the channel, then we're getting around dock areas, doing additional work at one home, something that's not benefiting multiple families, then we
But
go
correct me,
I felt
correct
like
me
we
if I-
decided we were
What-
moving away.
One-
well,
time.
but correct me if I'm wrong. Dredging Dorothy Lane is part of the original agreement to do the dredging at LLCD expense. And then, once we have honored all of our commitments, then we'll move to perhaps a different way of looking at things in the future.
Yeah, I think Dorothy Lane is the last multiple home access channel that has not been touched.
Not exactly.
Services.
I don't have the zone map in front of me, but you have an area in Laura's district. The Whittegrens live at the end of there. Ryan Wampler lives at the end of there, and I don't know how many houses that is.
There's a handful on the entrance to Whittegren.
And I guess, so Les and I served on the DSG as well as Pam, and so we had 3 board members on the DSG, and then we had 4 freeholders. I mean, it was one of the committees that had the most representation from the LLCD, I thought. So I guess where are we going from here? Last year, the DSG reported to the board and made recommendations from the committee. So is the committee no longer going to exist?
Did that happen last year?
I don't think the DSG.
We met last year.
Last year.
We did meet last
They
year.
did meet last year.
Yes, we did. Malcolm took
Yeah.
Ham's place.
That's right.
And we made the recommendations to raise the prices from the barges
Right.
as well. So,
Yeah.
and that's also when we made recommendations that we would serve those areas under the LLCD fee one time, and then, just like Salmon Harbor, we're gonna pay for private dredging.
That-
Memory serves.
And that's exactly what I said, Mike, or except you said it in more detail. So,
Well,
So would you like
is-
the third
Well,
priority to be that?
Well, yeah, and I guess is the lake health, the manager's lake health task group going to then assume some of the dredging things in the future going forward?
That's how I would see it, and I
That's how
think
I would
that's not a final
Okay.
thing to
it's not,
decide
Okay.
tonight.
it's not something that's been
I guess you
decided.
see where I'm coming
We
from.
kind of touched on this the other day when we talked,
Right.
that perhaps this would all be kind of
Okay.
assumed. And like I said, this is not a decision for tonight, and we'll talk more about it, but
Right, I guess
Certainly,
you have to understand,
sure.
I was the committee chair,
Right.
and we had board members that served on the committee. We had Malcolm, who just joined the committee, also the gentleman from Michael's district who just joined. So I think that we need to let these people know that the committee no longer exists and that we're going in a different direction,
Or
possibly.
we're thinking about going in a different direction.
Yes,
It just
'cause again,
makes sense, I think.
this was
And-
put on-
You guys
this-
will take it up at a later date.
Yeah,
on-
Exactly.
Okay, what our policy is
Well, and-
versus is this the last one or do we have more?
Well, and a
Well-
little history too, that is that when the DSG was formed, we had none of the strategic planning committee, nothing.
Yeah.
So it was and it was a very different time. There were some inequities in things, perceived inequities, and some that were accurate, and so that's where that started. But I do think we're morphing. I mean, I think it makes sense that we're getting more global.
I think
need
what
to
we
put it
have
all
the
together.
data, and Alex can put this together. We know where we've dredged since 2006. We can put that data together. We know the districts we've been in, we know the zones we've been in, and those zones, we need to decide, that have so many people in them, okay? I mean,
We need
I-
to make some rules. That's,
we need to set some guidelines that these people still need to be dredged, and after that, it's gonna be private.
Well,
There's going to
and
be.
beyond that, I think we need a discussion about how we're gonna make that happen, and obviously, we're not gonna do that tonight.
right.
Because
Okay.
dredging
But-
zones, I believe there's over 200 of them, and a lot of those have water access. Not
Correct.
every zone will be touched. I think Dorothy Lane is the last one that has zero access. That's
I think,
multi-home.
yeah, and I think her zone is very
Yeah,
close.
it is.
In the back of that channel.
Yeah,
Well,
there-
would
there's
you-
quite a few places though still that could stand it. I mean, I'm just thinking where Richardson Road comes down by the railroad trestle there, all that gravel just runs out there. And yeah, I know just a couple of years ago, I helped Roger Duke put a dock in, but there's no way that, you can just walk out there now pretty much. And I know those folks would like that area cleaned out.
Those areas are pretty small, going in the Reed Point, Tipperary Point, and then where Richardson Road comes out. And would you guys recommend those for third and fourth priorities for
I
this?
certainly would, District 5, I certainly would District 5. I think about the people in District 5 that may or may not have been promised to be dredged, and I wasn't in those conversations. And then Gene Curry for some private work, so.
That's District 4.
Okay, thank you. But, when we had the committee, those people were calling me and wanting to know when they were gonna get put on the list, so.
And ultimately, the goal would be to transition here, finish out the ones that have very limited access, and then transition to maybe doing multiple years of just strictly private to bring in money and to knock that list down. Because I think we could do potentially 2, if not 3 years of just private work.
How many are on the list, the wait list for private?
It's pretty substantial, yeah.
It's not that many people. It might be a lot of dirt, though.
Yeah, I think there's enough to do a couple of years of just private work.
And with that, I think and I understand why we went to those private people when we were in their area. I understand that. But now something probably needs to be talked about, where they go on that list. You know, because now we're not gonna be in a certain area. I mean, Dorothy
Yeah.
Lane, obviously, and maybe District 5, but then after that. Oh, 4, I apologize.
Even on the north?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't had my drink yet, so, but.
We will address all that for sure. Are you comfortable with the manager's recommendations? as
Yes,
stated? If
with
we have-
including District 4 and, well, and what, Richardson Road?
Well, that's,
Yeah,
that
Richardson Road, yeah.
is, I think that would probably fall into the category,
Of private?
well, I don't know. I mean, I
Okay.
think that, since that isn't on our original.
Why don't we go
So
with,
couldn't
why don't
we-
we go with Dorothy Lane and District 4 as the third priority? Okay,
And
Chipwood,
how long will that take us? Because maybe you guys just all need to like separately talk about it, because
Yes.
I thought that we were gonna have to do, you know, dredging out some of those waterways as part of our whole sediment mitigation. So if working on access is gonna take, you know, most of the, you know, a lot of the time, I really felt like this got talked about and decided last year. So maybe you guys need to talk more before we make any.
Right, and that's what we'll do.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, we can always add sections as the year goes on. We're not in a rush to add the section.
Malcolm, did you have a comment or a
Well,
clarification?
I had a question about Dorothy Lane. It seems to me that most of it would be easily done from the shore. And I think they are doing some of that, right? So you're
We
just
can't
talking about-
legally do that.
What?
The LLCD is one-step removal, so it has to go from our excavator,
Right,
go from the barge to our disposal site. So we can't dig from the shorelines as a conservancy district and move it, because then we're essentially moving it twice. It's
Well,
very convoluted.
you see how
Opening it-
intriguing that is, though, because it'd be so much more convenient to do it from
But
there.
opening up that channel, where you're talking about opening up that channel to change the filtration system is not.
That one has to come
That
from
has
the
to
lake,
be
yeah,
done,
where,
right.
where Dorothy Lane or where that creek channel splits off
Right,
Big
right,
Blossom, we'll
right.
have to do that,
It's
yeah.
a Y area there,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that'd be my recommendation now, would be to finish Chitwood, move to Dorothy Lane, and then we can meet and discuss and
that'd be great.
add ones onto it, so we'll have the two priorities and then following discussion.
Because Dorothy Lane is part of our overall
Yes.
sediment.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
management.
Exactly. We do have two, that's my district. Do either of you have a comment about this, being Dorothy Lane residents? We've worked with you for a while to try to get Kurt DeLone. And I am so sorry, I'm blanking on your name, but we met.
Tony Elrod.
Tony Elrod. You guys are without comment. Okay.
Yeah, all right. So we'll move with those and we'll discuss.
We probably should vote on those, since
Do we need
those
to make a
are,
motion?
yes.
Yes.
A motion to approve Dorothy Lane, followed with the backups of,
Chitwood first, Chitwood first,
Chitwood first,
Dorothy
yes, Dorothy
Lane,
Lane,
and then we'll talk more after
About the
those.
backups.
Yes, I
We'll
made that
come back to
motion.
the board. Thank you.
All right.
I'll second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the dredging priorities as stated. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you.
All right, sediment management project, more sediment. Last month, we gave a presentation on kind of where we are in the operation. I said we'll get that PowerPoint online. It is not, but
Yeah.
we'll do that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Where we are is we bought a piece of property on South Shore Drive across Middle Africa. We own that, and we're actually in the process working with Christopher Burke Engineering. We've done our wetland delineations, and we're working on the permitting for utilizing both that disposal site on land and utilizing the overflow pond south of the Long Causeway and portions of it, and creating a wetland there. And permitting will actually dictate that we have to go in and plant these areas, essentially creating a treatment wetland. So we'll be looking at areas for both sediment storage and nutrient uptake to kind of fight that blue-green algae that happens in those areas as well. And there's no guarantee that that one will get passed. I don't foresee any issues with the land side of it. We have finished the delineations and the site visits. The next step is actually getting the permitting in, that I'm hoping to have towards the end of the March, a meeting with Army Corps of Engineers, IDEM, and DNR to look at what our impacts are gonna be, potential mitigation requirements for the permitting. So with those, the next step would be prepping the areas, essentially on the land-based version, that would be creating a sediment settling pond, utilizing the dirt on the land and our dirt to create berms. Essentially what they do is use hydraulic dredging, and they pump the sediment into the settling ponds, the sediment settles out, and then the return water flows out and back into the lake. We've discussed last year the areas that we're looking at is the main bay, the main eastern bay, starting on the southern edge where Bean Blossom Creek comes in, and then moving north, and the goal is to move that entire bay to 5 feet and reclaim that area for recreation. The reasons those spots were checked at is because they impact everybody's recreation ability. So those will be the focus of this first hydraulic dredging project. We're in the process working with State Revolving Fund and looking at other potential financing sources. The job we're looking at, it's probably about 1.2 million, which actually includes a little bit of equipment, the site prep, and then the actual dredging itself.
Consulting also.
And yeah, consulting fees. Did you have a question?
How much land did you buy?
The land itself is like 14 acres. As of now, there's 6 that's open field, and I believe there's probably about another acre to acre and a half that we can utilize as well for the disposal site. Based on our calculations, if we can get the settling pond about 10 feet deep, we think we can fit upwards of 80 to 100,000 cubic yards. So we're confident that we'll be able to fit this entire first dredging project in that land-based pond. And that would be the first priority, is utilizing that. Any questions? It's the annual meeting, so.
Aren't we only gonna be able to use half of that? 14 acres?
Yeah, so about 6 acres is open field right now, and based on our wetland delineation report, there's potentially another acre and a half that we can gain that's wooded currently.
When will that be completed?
The delineation report is completed.
So they
I just
have-
received that, yeah. So we know what is wetland. The areas right off of South Shore Drive are considered wetlands. There is a small wetland that's less than 1/10 of an acre towards the southern boundary, which we can impact without mitigation if it's under 1/10 of an acre. So as we go for permitting, we're gonna go for permitting for the maximum usable area.
You
That
sent
we
this
can.
to the whole board yesterday, did you not? The wetland?
I didn't get that.
If not, I will send it out. I said definitely
No,
send it
I
like
thought
a
you had.
task. We
No,
just got
okay.
those, yeah.
All right, oh, maybe it's just like,
Yeah, I'd like to see the map.
Yeah, all right, we will make sure to send that out.
It's not on the website.
yes, Tony?
In your thought pattern there, I'm just asking a question, but when you're there, you're really gonna take the sediment off of that area and then tube it?
We're not looking at the tubing systems. So
Okay.
when we're talking to the consultants, once you get above about 50,000 cubic yards, the tubing actually becomes a negative impact on pricing. So what we're looking at doing is creating just an open, essentially pit basin for sediment settling, and we'll pump the sluice into the bay on one side and the creek, and essentially as the water flows through, the sediment will have time to flow out.
So you stir it and pump it?
Yeah, we pump it. It's essentially an auger head. It looks like an underwater snow blower. So the auger head cuts through the soft sediment and sucks up the sediment and the water slurry, and they pump it through tubing and then dump it into that basin there.
Gotcha.
I saw one more. Is Rebecca? Yes.
I didn't know if you had found out how many acres of the overflow lake you have to use for wetlands.
We do not know that yet. We'll start to find that out after we have our meeting with the Army Corps of Engineers and DNR. So I'm expecting that to hopefully be the 3rd week of March.
Yes, Frank?
And then we also have the potential, we have wetland, 2 wetland areas. The bigger area is the piece that's west of the wet drainage canal.
Okay,
So the land that's behind it is essentially dead, trapped land. So it's the lowland area also potentially, you could also make that wetland area, even though it's not delineated as wetland area now, as a trade-off for the areas that we have to make wetland. This area here now is 8/10 of an acre. So if we added the back piece of that, we can get an acre plus
By scooping it out essentially.
of scooping it out and putting some plants there, and we create wetland of the acreage that we have to make wetland, so we don't have to use the overflow pond or part of the rest of the lake basin.
In that case, you could buy back essentially
you've got
those
the-
pieces.
Well,
Ari Corbin.
yeah, this will all come out in the meetings once you
Right. So we
realize
have-
what
we
our
have some other
required mitigation
possibilities of
is.
where we can make wetland. It's not only
Makes
the
sense.
overflow
Yeah, it
pond,
does.
but there's other locations, either in the lake basin itself or this property, that we could do some other things once we start meeting with the Corps and we get a definitive answer on how much wetland we have to make as a
right.
minimum. Then we can decide where to put it that has the least impact to everybody.
Got it. All right.
Okay, all right.
Is that the end of your, is that the end of your spiel?
It is.
All right, well done. Might have been a record time. All right,
Well,
the next item on the agenda, I'm going to turn over to Michael Klitzing. The Park Master Plan Task Group has been hard at work rethinking the park, and this is your
Sure.
baby.
So, and Frank was also a good driver to help us move this a little bit forward. But one of the things that we really very much realized with the existing park and the infrastructure within the park is that it's in poor shape. I mean, in reality, there's been very little investment in the park since probably before the Lake Lemon Conservancy District was founded. And it shows in the condition of the shelter building, the restrooms, and everything else within the park. So one of the best practices when you have a park is to create, just like we did for the sedimentation management, is work with consultants, create what is called a Park Master Plan. And to talk a little bit about how that process usually works, and is that usually the process starts with what we consider a existing conditions assessment. And here's a graphical representation of it, using one of my parks in Carmel, where the consultant will come in and basically do an inventory of everything that's in the park today, and assess, you know, in this particular case, there's a fishing pier within it, and trails, and playgrounds, and what have you. So they'll take a look at what's in the park today and what the current conditions are, whether they're at or have exceeded their expected life expectancy, if it's repairable or not. So that's essentially what they'll do, and this is a graphic representation of it. The next step is usually basically some input. So they're going to want to talk to stakeholders. The stakeholders would be members of the board. It would be staff. It would be people that are huge users of the park. So in our case, with the Boys and Girls Club actually having a facility within Riddle Point Park, we would certainly want to talk to them. We'd want to talk to the city of Bloomington, since they own the property, CBU representation, since ultimately they would have to consent to whatever improvements we ultimately make in the park. So those type of stakeholders, as well as other significant user groups. It might be IU, the rowing team, since while they don't do as much activity with the relocation of the rowing course, they still obviously at least once used it this year. So we'll talk with some of those type of user groups. Then based on that, the consultants will typically come up with some concept plans, which look very similar to this. Under our proposal, it's going to have at least 2 concept plans. So, you know, 2 illustrations of what the park could look like in the future. And then you have a public input meeting. It might be an open house. It might be a meeting like this where we invite people to. The consultant goes over the different concepts, and we get feedback from the public as far as what do we like about the concepts, what don't we like about the concepts. Usually what I find is that with the 2 concepts, people will say, well, I kind of like this, I don't like this in this plan, I like this in this plan, and that in the other plan, and you get a merger of the 2. But effectively, that's what it happens. At the same time that they're doing this concept plan that they share with the public, they'll give illustrations to give you an idea of what it might look like. So in this particular plan, you know, we're looking at creating some wetlands and naturalizing an area where there's currently a playground, and building pickleball courts, and putting in a new fishing pier. So and here we've got illustrations of what a pickleball court looks like, and the types of fishing pier we're looking at, and what the boardwalks and naturalized areas would look like. So very similar, but obviously appropriate for Riddle Point Park. And then following that, there's more refinement usually a draft report that would look very similar to this. This one's for My West Park, which is a 120-acre park. So this was a, I think, $140,000 plan. We're not looking at that for here. But the concept of what was done here is very similar, where it reports all the existing conditions and the assessment. It shows the renditions of the various plans to get to a final recommended plan. It comes up with pricing recommendations. So, what's it going to cost to implement the plan? As well as the reality is we're not going to have the funds to do the entire plan at one time. For example, the park that I showed you, that's a $4 million plan. We don't have $4 million. So what it would do is it would really look at what are the highest needs, how can you chunk this out into real-size bites that we can afford, and based on that, then it allows us to proactively plan within our budgets. It gives us the mechanism that if there are grant opportunities, usually they're looking for documents like this to be able to support so they understand what you're doing. And also, if we're doing any fundraising, again, these are the types of things that donors are looking for to help them have confidence that what you're doing is feasible and based on a reality of plan. Now, these are not construction documents, these are concepts. And the next phase after we decide what we're going to do is actually, depending on the scope of the project, it might be hiring an architect or a landscape architect to put together the construction documents. Some of the things may be simpler where it doesn't need quite as detailed plans, but it gives you the roadmap so that we really can proactively decide how we're going to invest in the park. Now, the reason that's important, obviously we understand, the self-assessment or the assessment of the conditions of the park is going to be easy. It's all bad. But there are things, maybe the shelter, for example. That's the only historical component that's within the park. So maybe there's opportunities to preserve that, which would be great if it can. The restroom facility, there's no redeeming quality about that, so that needs replaced. But why is it important? Obviously, we want to continue to invest in the park, but the park is also a significant revenue driver for Lake Lemon. Looking at the 2019 numbers, we generated just under $190,000 in the park. And if you consider our overall revenue, including tax dollars, was $585,000, over a third of our revenue came from the park. If we do not invest in the park over the long run, people are not going to want to pay money to come into the park, or we'll lose the assets that are necessary to support the revenue that's being driven. We know that the ramp needs work and ideally expanded. We know that the restroom facility, while we've certainly made some enhancements last year, it's still not where it needs to be. So ultimately, as consumers become a little bit more finicky, and they certainly do as it comes to parks and especially revenue-driving parks, we've got to make some improvements. So this is the roadmap to make that possible. What we did is the Conservancy District put out a request for information, or basically a request for qualifications to say, invite some various contractors that are reputable in doing these type of master plans. We did receive 3 responses. One of them was grossly expensive. They do beautiful work, but it was twice the next lowest one. So we made that was an easy rollout. So we did within the task force assess the 2. The 2 finalists were Cornerstone, PDS. I always get their initials mixed up, and Schneider Geomatics. For Schneider Geomatics, I'm very familiar with them. They've done a number of our parks. I work with them on a regular basis. They do great work. Their proposal came in at $29,990. Cornerstone PDS, who I know the principal of that company very well, but I haven't done work with her in many years, 2000 back when I was in Lafayette. But they do a lot of work with the city of Bloomington. I talked with the director of Bloomington Parks and Recreation. They had glowing references for her. They also she did a very similar park in Lebanon, not as large a lake, but it did have a water component. Acreage is very similar to what Riddle Point Park is. The director there was also very pleased with her work. Her proposal came in at $23,000. While I'm a little bit more familiar with Schneider, and at the same point, $6,990 for Lake Lemon Conservancy District is a significant amount. So I think it's certainly my recommendation, and I think it was the general consensus of the task force, that we recommend issuing a contract to Cornerstone PDS for the services. And the recommendation further is to authorize the manager and the board president to negotiate the contract with an amount not to exceed $23,000.
23, okay.
What would be the timing on this?
Uh,
When could they start?
Sure. So the first thing is to get the contract in place, which shouldn't take too long. I've given a sample contract that
We have professional services, and then they have professional services. We'll do a hybrid.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be as complex as ours, but we should be able to get them under contract probably within a couple of weeks, month at the most. A master plan for the scope of Riddle Point Park is probably a 6 to 9 month project. The contract will say has to be done within 9 months, and that's very realistic for this type of project. So we should have a plan that comes to the board for approval before the end of this year.
You know, the other advantage of Cornerstone then too, though, is they're used to working with Bloomington, so if
Yeah,
we do
that's a
have
good connection.
connection, or, you know, a need for a connection with CBU and so on, they're well connected already here, and that's, to me, an advantage.
They're currently managing a number of the park improvement projects that Bloomington is implementing. They obviously have, Bloomington has the big switchyard project, which Cornerstone is not directly involved in, but a lot of the smaller projects that I think total about $20 million worth of scope. They didn't necessarily do the master plan for that, but they've been contracted to help the oversight of the construction of them. Like I said, the recommendations or the feedback I had both from Paula McDevitt, who's the director here in Bloomington, and John Messenger, who's in Lebanon, both of them were very favorable. How easy Deb and her team is to work with, the responsiveness, the ability to facilitate the public input process. All of it was very
They're
well.
actually located in Fisher.
They're located in Fisher, yeah.
Yeah, plus they're a little bit smaller too. The other ones, kind of, how many employees did they have?
Yeah.
Snyder, they had a ton.
Yeah.
And I just kind of felt, you know, we'd get a little better attention because
Right.
we're not big potatoes here.
Right.
And
so
the
on.
fact that she has active work currently in Bloomington.
Yeah.
She's going to be down here a lot for Bloomington's, the city's work, so
Some work
they're already going to be
That
here.
makes sense.
I've heard what I need to hear. Are there other questions for anybody on the task group?
You mentioned in an email that the gatehouse was going to be on hold now, so I'm just kind of curious about how that'll be part of this master plan.
Sure, so based on conversations with
Yeah, I
Adam-
did not believe, I was very hopeful in January that I'd be able to get the gatehouse
Okay.
in motion prior to us bringing in gatehouse in the start of the season, which we usually bring in gatehouse in March, mid to late March. That did not happen. So what I think the plan is to just kind of paint the gatehouse, essentially make it look decent for the season, and then look towards the fall. And actually, once we have the master plan in place, then we can make sure the aesthetics, the looks, the functionality of the gatehouse can fall in line with our master plan.
which is ideally,
I-
in the perfect world, that's what we
Yeah.
want
And then-
anyway, so.
And then the gatehouse might be the first
Right.
implementation
Yeah.
that we do.
Well, and then there.
Or we could get a tent.
Michael, the only other thing I would ask you to try to dig up was a cool line you had in one of your emails about attracting people to a park that is in or
Right.
having people in a park with poor repair behavior versus. a nice-
Exactly. What I've found in the various park systems I've worked with or back in my consulting days too, is if you have a nice park that is well maintained, it attracts a level or it affords a level of respect from the users that if you have a rundown park, doesn't receive. Doesn't mean, you may get the exact same people, but the way they treat it can
It's
be
very
different.
I thought
So-
that was.
Yeah, there's actually some research called the broken window syndrome, where if you can picture like an older factory with lots of windows in it, and somebody comes along and throws a rock through it, and they don't fix it, they're apt to get a lot more rocks thrown through the window. But if they fix it up right away.
And we even see the same thing when you're dealing with graffiti
Sure.
within. I mean,
And garbage.
And
Same
garbage.
way.
If
Trash.
you address it very quickly, then you tend to chase the people away because they want their art to stay. Whereas if you leave it, then you get more and more and more of it. So very much the same thing. So I think that also helps. And doing that too, I mean, we've got 2 districts that border up to the park too. I mean, if we let it go down, we are adversely impacting those neighbors as well.
I think we need a motion then to.
So since it wasn't budgeted,
Oh.
now we think we have the money, right?
So
Because we're not doing the gatehouse.
Yeah, and we
So
had
I just
30,000
kinda want
budgeted
to-
for the gatehouse, so it would
Okay.
cover this 23.
Good,
Yeah.
good.
So then how are we gonna build the gatehouse?
Well, ideally, if we plan out the gatehouse, we can build it in November and December and build it out in January and plan for that expenditure in the 2021 budget.
Okay.
Yeah, you still have 7,000 left over, so I mean, we'll be able to.
If we, yeah, we need to, start with materials, but essentially push it to the fourth quarter towards the end of the year and then finance it in January.
It will just be a slow pay like a lot of businesses are.
Yeah.
So I make a motion to approve the Cornerstone agreement, move forward with that.
Second?
Did you want to cap?
Recommend
Capital
not to
plan.
exceed 23,000 and authorizing the president
And I'll get a
and
contract.
manager to negotiate the contract.
Thank you.
That way we don't have to bring it back to the board.
Okay, it has been moved that we authorize the contract with Cornerstone not to exceed 23,000. May I have a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Michael, thank you. You can tell
Yeah,
he does this for a
exciting.
living.
That's
You too.
that's the carrot.
Very good. All
All
right.
funds on that.
Strategic Planning Committee update, Mary Jane.
Okay.
Actually, it says AC, it's you.
Adam has actually talked about the bulk of what we discussed in the last sediment management committee meeting, strategic planning committee meeting. And the only other thing I wanted to note, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Malcolm, but one of the things that wasn't really on our agenda, but we did talk about it, and you'll see it in the minutes, is that Malcolm McClure has set up a hydrology lab in his basement, and it has been doing some interesting studies on his own about sediment flow and what happens during heavy rain events and those kinds of things. And I know in the next newsletter, I believe, there's going to be a story about it, but it's very interesting, and
Wow.
I think he may have data that's going to be very helpful to us as a conservancy district. So,
Am I supposed to say something? Or?
no, only if you would like to.
Well, okay. As a science geek, you can't stop me from doing this kind of thing, and so this is what I do naturally. I've drawn up the cross section of the bridge at 45 there, and I can now determine how fast water is coming underneath it, how much sediment is in the water, and so on. So I can measure how much sediment actually flows under the bridge. That doesn't tell you how much makes it to the lake, but I've also got the facilities to do all of that as well. Also, I set up a weather station so I can correlate the amount of rainfall with the height of the lake. And that's available to anybody because it's a cloud-based system that when the newsletter comes out, the address will be in there, but you can log in and see how high the lake is at any given time. So,
Wow.
like for instance, if you live in Indianapolis and come down here on weekends, you can know, well, the lake is 1.5 feet low, I won't be able to get my boat out. Or it's 1.5 feet high and I've got water in my basement. So anyway, that's all.
Always good things to
That
know.
is.
Yes.
One of the major topics of the last meeting was that it was the last meeting of the Strategic Planning Committee, and I put some slides together because I think that we get in the middle of doing things and we kind of forget where we came from, which, oh, I did it. So I put a few slides together, and I'm just going to take a minute and go back through what we have done and how it all came to be. I don't know if anybody realizes it, but it was about 3.5 years ago that Mike Blackwell and Frank Van Overmeren suggested that we needed to form a master plan for managing sediment in the lake. And that became the Strategic Planning Committee, and the board approved the committee at the end of 2016. So we've been meeting for 3 years, and the committee was composition, because it was a formal committee, couldn't have more than 3 board members on it. And at that time, we didn't think that was an issue because we had a lot of new people on the board. We were trying to come together as a team, and it made some sense. We had, and most importantly, I think we had some very actively interested freeholders who wanted to participate. So we set up the committee, and these are not the original members of the committee that you see there. We had a few changes, but we ended up with at least one person from each of the 7 districts and more. And then, of course, as the board members know, over the last couple of years, it's been, well, I want to go to the SPC meeting, or I don't know what's going on for sure. And as we got our feet on the ground, that became a little bit of an issue. The original mission for the committee was to research issues relevant to the future of the lake and make viable recommendations to the board. And that was our primary mission, was to create a long-term plan for managing sediment. And then, of course, it was also to develop a financial plan to support implementation of those things. And like any organized group, we blossomed that mission a little bit, and we created a number of task groups, and you see them there. Lake health, financial management, parks and recreation, park, I guess, not the TV show, and charitable giving. And but our primary focus was always on lake health and managing sediment. So other things got pushed to the side. But one of the things that I think the committee has done extremely well has been to research things, because we were in territory as we began this work that a lot of us had, either in our professional lives or certainly not in our personal lives, knew much about. Who knew a lot about the state revolving fund? Who knew a lot about how you finance something like this? And then we've talked to different members of the committee, have talked to all kinds of different resources and consultants along the way. And we have had some significant accomplishments, and I actually jotted down. We now have a sediment mitigation plan that I think will take us out for at least the next 5 to 10 years. And that's, in my mind, that was our primary mission. We are on the road now that we can have other board members participate to having a park plan. And under the, I put communication up there, but it's been so much more than that. And I'm sorry Kathy isn't here tonight, because I'd like to sing her praises a little bit. We found Constant Contact and began to utilize that, and Adam and Alex got everybody moved over onto Constant Contact so we could get some really good communication going. Kathy created the newsletter, and for the first time we have a newsletter, for better or worse. It may still be too long, I don't know, but we are getting information out to people on a regular basis that I think in the past we didn't do such a great job of. And what that has done is not only given people more information, it's raised their awareness and educated them about the issues that the Conservancy faces and the issues that the lake faces. have made some strides in fundraising, but we need to do more. We created the Lake Lemon Enhancement Fund and got it set up in the two foundations, the Community Foundation of Bloomington and Monroe County and the Brown County Foundation. And we have some regular fundraising activities that have met with some success. Probably the most prominent one is the Home Tour by Boat event, which continues to amaze me every year, and there will be more. And then on the education front, the board last fall went through philanthropic training session with Angela White. And so when I think about the 3 years, you're like, well, if this is, you're moving along, why are you changing now? The plan for sediment mitigation, as I said, is developed. We feel strongly that the financing needs to be under the direct control of the board. And we need to expand board involvement. One, because it makes good sense, and we're the ones, as elected representatives from our districts, who are primarily responsible. And because board members want to be involved, which is a great thing. And the other thing that I had not focused on until I think maybe last fall sometime was that we need to maximize the use of the scarce resources that we have. The Strategic Planning Committee operates as a formal committee, much like the board does. So there's notice of meetings, there's preparation of an agenda, there's minutes, there's a lot of administrative background work. And what we found was happening was that Adam was giving his manager's report, more or less, not all of it, at the SPC meeting and then coming to the board meeting. And we don't have the luxury of having enough staff to not be more efficient in how we do that. So we've been talking about having manager task groups, and some of those were appointed earlier, but we've now come together, I think, and here are the primary manager task groups that Adam has recommended, and you can see who's on it. The other thing I will say is that everybody on the Strategic Planning Committee, except for Lance, is now on one of these teams. And so while the format for how people meet is going to change a little bit, everybody's going to continue to be involved, and we're happy that they want to do it. And I will say to the board the same thing I said at last Friday's SPC meeting. It's been an honor for me to lead this team. I never knew that people, just plain old volunteers, and I don't mean old, in old that way, but ordinary volunteers, not ordinary, that volunteers could put so much of themselves and their time. Extraordinary volunteers. Thank you, Michael. It could put so much of their own efforts and dedicate so much of their time and their own personal resources. So it's been a real privilege to work with everyone to this point, and I look forward to working with some and all going forward.
Well, and if I could add a personal thank you to you for assuming this task when you were barely behind the ears as a board member.
I was going to say I was new.
You were about six
and
months
Mike
in.
was very charming about it.
Well, he can be very charming.
Thank you.
Seriously, she was about 6 to 7 months in. Have I got that right?
Yeah, it was my first year on the board.
First year, and I couldn't be more grateful to her for coming in at a time when we needed some more support, and this all has been a movement in a way. So I would just look at it like
Are you going to miss those Friday meetings?
hell no.
Well, no,
But now
because
she's got
now
two
I
more.
have a capital
She's got
campaign
two.
meeting and financial.
Yeah, now you've got 2 meetings.
Yes, Malcolm?
So I have a comment, I guess. Not shown up here is the Lemonade Days Committee, which by necessity is not a board
Okay.
function, but
Let me speak.
that will also be ongoing, and if anybody has an idea for an event they'd like to have or whatever, I guess that's the venue they do it in.
Okay, we have, and I should, thank you, that's an important aspect here, because
It goes under charitable.
it goes
giving,
with
too.
charitable giving, but the Lemonade Days Committee is still in existence, and to Malcolm's point, we're always looking for other people to help volunteer for events, and also to help us come up with ideas for how to raise more money with other kinds of events. So thank you. Rebecca?
I just have one correction, I think, to the minutes that were on the board agenda packet, that the strategic planning committee meeting minutes you did says Friday, January 8th, and I think it's really the February 14th.
Oh,
We made a mistake.
yeah, we did. February 14th. Alex, can you change that for posterity's sake? Thank you.
Please.
That'll be your last, that's the last time you have to do those minutes.
All right, thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
You didn't even cry.
I've already done that.
Oh, I know. All right, the next item on our agenda is board election results. This year is like last year. You will be seeing the same exact faces at this table. Things usually do rotate every year, but we got a little out of whack a few years back, and I think that's why we're still kind of on this same. But that's a good thing, and I look forward to being a part of the board with such consistency, and that always is a good way to start off. So sub-area 2, Mary Jane.
No, 3.
I'm sorry, 3. Should I wear glasses? Yes. Sub-area 3.
We're having problems over there on.
3, 4.
Number issues. I got it right before. Mary Jane ran uncontested for her area 3 and also sub-area 5. Les Wadzinski was uncontested as well. So there is no vote needed this evening. They are just to be sworn in. And if we could just do that now, that would be great. You can stay sitting if you want to. If you want to be real formal and stand in front of the flag, we could do that too. Why don't we go ladies first?
Okay.
Mary Jane, repeat after me. I do solemnly swear that I shall,
I do solemnly swear that I shall,
to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability,
strive to accomplish the purposes for which the district is established. You can break it down. Strive to accomplish the purposes.
She gave me those short.
Strive to accomplish the purposes.
I could just read it.
Mhm.
Strive to accomplish the purposes for which the district is established,
And to properly operate and maintain its works of improvement.
and to properly operate and maintain its works of improvement.
Very well. Thank you. And I was reading you Les's, but that's
You
all right.
passed it.
Is this different?
No, Here, Les, let me pass this to you since we had some issues. Les, I do solemnly swear that I shall,
I do solemnly swear that I shall,
to the best of my ability,
to the best of my ability,
strive to accomplish the purposes
strive to accomplish the purposes
for which the district is established,
for which the district is established,
and to properly operate
and to properly operate
and maintain its works of improvement.
and maintain its works of improvement.
And thank you both for your service. Duly done. Oh, you have to sign this one. It's the
You have to sign the original.
All right.
It's got a seal on
It's
it.
got a seal.
Okay, the reason you all are here, who's doing the drawing tonight? Did you decide, Alex, who was going to do the drawing? Did you?
It was Alex, wasn't it?
Well, Mary Jane did it last year, she reminded us, so.
I'm happy to do it again.
Oh, I thought we were going to say something. That's-
You thought what?
I thought you'd share, but I guess not.
No, you want to?
No, I don't.
Pass that down.
Pass it to Mary
Oh,
Jane.
you're supposed to go into that part, okay.
It means so much to her, so.
Is everybody in here?
Yes. Slots upside down.
What?
Isn't the slot on the bottom?
There's a hole.
Well, there's a hole to put her hand in. She can't fit her hand
Yeah,
in that
they-
little slot.
but did any tickets fall
I just
out?
want to make sure.
No, I don't see it.
Just Malcolm's, that's
Ticket
okay.
number,
Part of the
Yours fell
risk.
out, Mel.
I don't want to rip up the box. Okay, 937-5687. Really?
Oh,
Make sure you check it.
937-5687.
That's Malcolm.
That's a winner. That's a brand new boat.
Malcolm will have a
Good.
certificate for you.
Good,
We have
good.
one more.
You've earned that.
If the next one goes to Frank, I think it's gonna be really.
937-5684.
Not me.
So you, Rebecca? Very good. That's great. Well, enjoy those. That's awesome.
Yeah, just hold that, and then, when you come.
Bring it to my office.
There you go. The next item on the agenda is a letter of support request for the sewer district project. Frank, I will have you speak to it in just a minute when we get. Are we good? Okay. All right, Frank, have at it.
As in a previous meeting, I've come up to the group and requested that the Lake Lemons Conservancy District issue a letter of support to address two issues. I'll give you a background first. Another local area, District 7 freeholder and myself have created the Lake Lemon Environmental Cooperative. Its intent is to essentially create a municipal sewer district for the area around Lake Lemon and its surrounding border of approximately a mile around Lake Lemon for the housing and commercial operations around Lake Lemon to protect the watershed of Lake Lemon. So we created an environmental cooperative, essentially a regional sewer district, and we're in the process of going through the process of grading grants and engineering studies and all those kinds of things to do that. What we're asking this board is two things. One is a letter of support that you support that kind of action from us. And the second is a piece that you as a board or as a conservancy district, because you are officially a governmental entity, are not interested in becoming a regional sewer district yourselves. So we would not be in conflict of view to do such a thing. So that's our letter request. Up to 3 days ago, there wasn't much more I could say because it was a number of side things going on in the background. If any of you have read the current edition of the Bloomington Democrat that's come out, you'll
Brown
see-
County.
Brown County Democrat, you'll see that there's a lot of action going on. We have rustled in a favorable way, lots of feathers, and created a lot of interest in what we're doing. And to give some history, about a decade ago, the Brown County Regional Sewer District was established to essentially address creating municipal sewer type systems for the remaining balance of Brown County that isn't covered by other regional sewer districts like the city of Nashville or the town of Helmsburg. And to go through their primary first project was the Bean Blossom area. That, because of the scope of their project and the way they went towards addressing their project, took forever. And they are now just going to shortly be unveiling some things. I'm not going to say much to give their hurrah. But essentially, they have issued a study, which is out for public information now, was released last week, is talked about in the article that's addressed this week in the newspaper. And within that piece, the Lake Lemon area was number 4 project in the list of things, with the Bean Blossom area being project number 1, project number 2 being Helmsburg and the reconstruction of their existing plant. Their existing plant only has about a 10-year life cycle left to it, and they have no operating fund to do substantial improvements or no replacement funds in place. Project number 3 was either the Trevlock area or a different area north in Brown County. And then we were essentially project number 5 concerning the Lake Lemon area. They also just recently got a study to where they define all the user units as a regional sewer district classifies entities, and have determined that actually we are higher in user units than anybody ever thought. So we have now, that's the rustling of feathers in a good way. And because of some politics and other things going on with the Helmsburg project, it is probable that the Lake Lemon area will become project number 2.
Oh, wow.
So as a result of that, at the request of the Brown County Commissioners, our efforts to create our own regional sewer district, we are on a 100-day hold at their request, and they're working out some of the politics of that kind of stuff, and we may actually join forces with the Brown County activity that's going on, and to jointly create a area of sewer district that serves our area and would also extend into Monroe County.
So it would go all around the lake.
It would potentially do 2 service lakes that would service both North Shore and South Shore, not necessarily connect on the far west end, but yes, essentially serve areas on both sides of the lake, all around the lake. So all great news, but we are only on a 100-day hold, and regardless of what happens, we still need eventually to address that the Lake Lemon Conservancy District is not interested in becoming a regional sewer district. So it is a step that regardless of what happens, we need to have some kind of letter like this to roll forward. So I'm asking the board to, as we addressed a couple months ago, as the beginning of this activity, to create such a letter and then issue that to me. I'm the president of the Lake Lemon Environmental Cooperative, would be my title. I'm going to address the letter. And then we would carry that forward, be it our project or in concert with what we team up with the Brown County Regional Sewer District.
Who's requesting that letter?
It is a document that if we proceed forward and ask for grants through rural development, State of Indiana Rural Development, it is part of the process to make sure that we are not in conflict with any other regional sewer districts or governmental entities in the area we serve. So just as we had to go and get permission to do what we're doing from the Brown County Regional Sewer District, and then they said, "Whoa, wait, we'd love you to do what you're going to do. We'd rather we do it for you." And we said, "That's great, but we don't want to be number 5 on the list. And here's the reasons why." And one of the big reasons is the fact that when our watershed lake raises, we flood out a huge number of septic systems. And that reality is a high amount of points in getting future federal grants, which is very attractive to both the Bean Blossom Group and to the Helmsburg Group. And one thing that is inaccurately reported in the newspaper is the Helmsburg Group has been talking to us. That's not true. We haven't had any conversations with them. It has only been with the Brown County Commissioners and the activities that they're doing with the Brown County Regional Sewer District. So, but the whole end game is we want to get sewers for the properties around the lake. That's the bottom line. And if we can't get it through the Brown County operation that extends and gets permission from the Monroe County Commissioners, which does not have a Monroe County Regional Sewer District to cover all the rest of the areas in Monroe County that are not under a sewer district. They don't have such a thing developed yet. Their group in Brown County would be able to extend partially over into Monroe County to cover the districts that we have within our Conservancy District around the lake. And that's not perceived to be a problem. So the whole end game is to get more users, spread out the cost, and the fact that they can get us as the lake gives them more brownie points in getting federal grant money.
So best case scenario, you'd have 100% around the lake of the option to hook onto a sewer line.
That would be correct.
That'd be the best case.
And just to be clear, that's 100% availability for the option to connect. It is not mandatory.
Yeah, and so how is it paid for? by, the individual landowner wants to hook on?
It is substantially paid for by federal grants, somewhat paid for by grants through the state revolving fund. But some of the state revolving fund is money that's gotten from grants from the federal government. There's a backflow issue of that to where in certain categories of projects that they actually get sister money, 50% from the federal government goes into the state revolving fund, and then state revolving fund administers those funds. Reality is a vast majority of the cost would be covered, the installation cost would be covered by the grants that would be received, including all the engineering studies, permitting, construction, all those kind of activities. The monies that would be paid by an individual user unit, depending upon how it gets set up, would be tied to probably your water bill, because that relates to how much water you take out, sewage you put in, like most municipalities utilize. So the porthole would use more water, would pay more sewer bill than a traditional resident would pay. Those fees typically go into operating costs and a small amount for infrastructure, future redevelopment and improvements, capital improvements. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but.
Yeah.
Would there be an individual hookup fee?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, there is always that. Our target numbers that we are looking at, if we go our plan, which is now starting, that's a different turn that the Brown County Regional Sewer District has finally realized that they're not going to just go with one big plant and serve one big giant area. They're going to go with multiple plants and potentially decentralize. Like we were looking at. We followed their template but learned their lessons of what bogged them down. So that's why in 6 months, 7 months, we got as far as it took them 6 years to get, which all of a sudden became very attractive to them as we caught up to them, almost caught up to them. Different piece, but yes, there would be an initial hookup cost. Our investigation with the engineers that we had already contracted and their numbers, we're looking at probably more than $2,500, probably close to a $3,500 number per hookup. And essentially they would go into your potential property, either directly next to your existing septic tank. We go through and drop a hole, put a grinder pump system operation in, reconnect your lateral from your house to that grinder pump, which would then take that fluid and go to a pressurized line versus a gravity feed line that would ultimately go back to the processing plant. So the municipality entity would own the grinder pump operation and service and maintain it. You would just pay a small unit fee for the electrical cost of that grinder pump. And there's also a little buzzer alarm that would go in your house in case it doesn't work and we get to a fill line on the grinder pump.
It'll blow you out of bed in the middle of the night if it goes off. Just tell you that. But it works.
It's an enclosed system and it's pressurized, so there essentially is much more desirable for the EPA regulations. And if they look towards our technology, we are actually half of the limits for what we were looking at as the AGI wheel system, that is what is the traditional permitting system by a municipal system. So.
What I'd like to suggest we do, Frank, is generate this letter. How fast do you need this? I would like the board to see anything that we're supporting before we
That's fine.
submit it to you, and then
We're in our
further on.
100-day hold, so I can wait till next month, but that's not an issue.
Okay. Why don't we, if the board is in agreement, let's proceed. We'll either, I'll help you write it, or Snooks, you're such a great writer. Might be. But we'll kind of make it a team effort, and then we'll distribute that for your review. I don't know that we necessarily need a motion to write this letter. We're just being asked for, but we want to be very formal about it. I'm happy to do that once we get the letter in hand. That might be our best bet.
Makes sense.
Sound okay? Then we're crossing all
Just
the
approve the letter.
T's. Okay, we'll work on that
I
for.
know you won't want to answer this, but are you thinking 5 years out, 10 years out?
If we did it under our system, I would potentially have sewers online in project area A in 3 years.
I'm just curious.
And-
So if we do it under their
Yeah.
system, it may be 5. I don't want to go longer. And that's part of the pressure. We have the incentive, we have the user interest. We also have the best desirable federal grant funding money availability.
Yeah.
So it's either, and that's why, as the article in the Democrat points out, they're courting us
Right.
because they want our user quantity, which they didn't recognize we're as big as what we are. And we get additional credits because our septic systems, when they fail, go directly into the lake versus
Right.
me just polluting my next door neighbor. kind of
Right.
thing. So,
Well, Frank, thank you, and to Russ as well for all the hard work, and we'll get that letter going and have that at the next meeting in March. I'll get to that in a minute. I'm going to switch to public comment as we kind of close down here. Are there any?
Did I have public comment for me? Or?
No, you were an
Okay.
agenda, you were a real agenda item.
Okay.
I mean, not that this isn't real, but
You were a separate agenda
Okay,
item.
good, I can sit down.
Tony Elrod, I'm not going to forget your name ever again, from my district.
My name is Tony Elrod. I live on Dorothy Lane. I see I'm 3 years late on the plan to sediment removal. I'm probably the closest person to the creek before it gets to anybody else these days. And I did come also for the dredging of Dorothy Lane, but more than anything for me, I guess I want to try and make sense to the fact of draining the water and not draining the water in the winter. And I know I don't want to take a lot of your time up, and obviously everybody's given a lot of thought to this, but for me, I mean, I've been here for 43 years. I got my house in '77. I knew it was low. I raised it 4 blocks to protect it. I've made it to my house, I think, every flood that has ever happened, except for 3 in 43 years, even the big flood. What I'm trying to figure out is, what is the benefit to most people to not drain the lake? When I got here, that was a norm. Obviously, it's been a norm for 42 years and still till last year. First year I ever had to face total water in my house and 10-degree weather where your heat wouldn't work, your pipes were gonna freeze, all the things that were just a complete misery, disaster, headache. And I don't see the benefit for everybody else to that point. On top of that, I'm a very observant person. Every leaf that falls in the fall, the minute that first flood comes, it's going down that creek. The longer it sits there, the more it gets rained on, the more it gets snowed on, the more it gets mud on it, the longer it stays there until you have like the 100-year flood. I walk down the middle of North Shore Drive with water to here to get to my house in that flood. All of those things are hitting that lake. And that the quicker you let it flood on those fall leaves, the more debris you have, not the less. The longer it sits there for the spring flood, the lighter floods, the more chances you got of that staying put and not going down the creek. Just a point. Another biggest point that I can say is, and I can give you, I'm a big fisherman. I've fished and hunted in probably 18 states. At the end of every flood, there is a point, and I used to go drag the tree stumps and everything out of the big bottleneck myself and my son. But maybe a report line, suggestion, this is there. Kurt and I talked about why this island is now there, this chunk of trees or wherever. I can take you to those trees. If you could get to them, you could dig them up. There's boats there. There's docks there. Big things that got stuck there that nobody dealt with. And if they would have dealt with them. Right now, that line that's going out of the creek and out into what is the most common bay line, I guess you'd call it, right off the rock point with the big flag. Big trees is what laid there first. Back all the way up to where the bird watchers are. When I got there, you could get to there, take a sharp right, go south North Shore Drive. You know, it's boats, and there's a little waterway in there now, but there's an island in there with big trees, boats in that, tree stumps are in that. If somebody would have immediately, maybe a committee, that after every flood goes, just to observe and say, oh, wow, we get that, because it would help. There isn't any doubt about that. I mean, inward outward boat down that creek that we're talking about, at the end of that creek, was buried there. You know, the leaves hit it, the trees hit it, all of that piles up over it, and then you got the roadblock. But for all of us, we got to realize, in my opinion, two things. Where the marina was in 1954 wasn't anywhere it is now. It's way back on the creek, and so everybody had access to it, or it wouldn't have been there. And everything since then, and all the way up through then, is sediment. No matter how you look at it. It's coming that way, and it's coming, we're the only lake. I know everybody knows it, but we're the only lake. That creek goes straight through our lake. It's not Sweetwater where it dumps over and hits the creek and then comes. Everything that comes through there is there, and it hits that west wind and it drops. It slows it down, and all that sediment's coming. The less floods you have, the longer your lake's gonna last. So if you have 2 or 3 more floods at full lake level every winter, you're gonna lose your lake faster than the other way. In my opinion, Mr. Maxwell, obviously, or Blackwell, I apologize, but you were on that board, so I can't, you probably looked at it, from what I saw, much more sediment facts than what I did, but.
No, sir, I'm just taking it all in, and that's basically, how we've gotten to this point, was a lot of different opinions, and
I watch it religiously. I mean, I'm there. I'm seeing those logs come down that creek. I'm seeing those docks come down that creek. I got it all. So for me, it's just pure misery to have a flood and have to fight it. But then I'm probably going to have 3 more every year. 2 more every year. Got 3 this winter, right? Close. Had 2 for sure. One's a good one, and one mediocre one. And those leaves are going. Anyway, thanks so much.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, I'm sorry, Spencer. My bad.
First off, I just want to say thank you to you all for having a good year on the lake. We had an excellent year. We had a lot of fun. I know you guys put in a lot of hours. And you're a lot of controversy through the years. You've all handled it professionally. Thank you very much. Second thing about fireworks, the more powder burn, the better. If you want to raise money, I suggest we try to get maybe boats go around or something to get some money, but I'm for more powder.
All right. Everybody ready to go see? Anybody got a game update for me? Scotty? No? Oh my, you let me down. Okay.
Probably.
Sandy?
All I know is Lord
Okay.
just texted me and said, oh, Lord.
Oh, no. Well, that's not good. All right. Well, let's get y'all out of here so you can listen or see it. Next meeting is Thursday, March. Oh, Carol, are you speaking? I'm sorry. You sure?
Thought you were done.
Thursday, March 26th, right back here at 6 o'clock, the next meeting. If no other comments, I would entertain a motion to adjourn, and thank you all.
Second.
All right, we are officially adjourned. Thank you for coming. Drive safely.
And the boilers are up 1815 with 356 left.
Oh, Lord. That was inappropriate.
1815, yeah, it's a high score.
Playing some fine defense there.